I stood barefoot on my dock, sipping my morning coffee, when a man I'd never seen before asked me what time the kayak parade started. Behind him were nearly 20 tourists in neon shirts, flip-flops, and wide-brimmed hats snapping selfies with my fishing gear and stretching their yoga mats on my deck chairs. One woman had even unstrapped her baby's diaper and was rinsing it in my lake. My jaw clenched so hard I nearly cracked a molar. I wasn't running a resort, and this certainly wasn't some public park. Yet, somehow, these strangers had not only found their way onto my private property, they were acting like they'd paid for the privilege. It didn't take long to find out who sent them. Her name was Karen, and she was waving from the end of my bridge like she was welcoming guests to a vineyard in Napa Valley. That was the moment I knew she'd declared war. She just didn't realize I had the bridge, and soon I'd have the upper hand. My name is Lucas Weller, and for the last 11 years I'd lived at the edge of Serenity Lake, a tranquil place tucked deep into the hills, accessible only by a long private bridge that my grandfather had built by hand before the county even existed. I inherited the home and the rights to the bridge after my father passed, and I'd always kept the area pristine and quiet. The bridge wasn't just a path, it was the gatekeeper. Without access to it, the property couldn't be reached except by boat or helicopter, which made it perfect for someone like me who valued solitude. I worked remotely as a security systems engineer and found peace in the sounds of loons, not leaf blowers or late-night karaoke. That peace shattered the moment Karen bought the house across the lake. At first, it was little things. She'd wave too enthusiastically from her second-story balcony, like we were lifelong friends instead of neighbors who'd never spoken. Then came the flyers taped to the community mailboxes, offers for exclusive lakeside yoga, dock meditation classes, and something called Karen's Culture Tours, complete with photos of places that looked suspiciously like my backyard. I thought it was annoying but harmless. I was wrong. Dead wrong. 2 weeks before the tourist invasion, I'd noticed more cars than usual parked at the base of the lake entrance. Not uncommon in summer, but strange given the quiet reputation of our road. Then came the drone. It hovered over my boathouse one afternoon while I was on a Zoom call. I spotted it through the window, buzzing like a mechanical hornet, taking photos or video, I wasn't sure which. When I stepped outside to confront it, it zipped off toward Karen's side like a guilty puppy. Still, I didn't put it together until I saw the bus. Yes, a full-sized tourist shuttle, the kind you'd see hauling retirees through wine country, pulled up on a Sunday morning and dumped its passengers at the foot of my bridge. I'd installed a code lock on the control panel, but I hadn't disabled manual access, because why would I? It was built with a crank failsafe in case of power outage. Karen must have studied it like a hawk, because she managed to override it and lower the bridge herself. She waved them across like she was the hostess of a lakefront palace. I came out to a crowd of 30 strangers on my land. A kid rode his scooter into one of my rose bushes. A woman asked if my Labrador bear was available for photos. When I told them they were trespassing, they looked confused, even insulted. One man actually said, "But Karen said it was fine." That's when she waltzed onto my dock in a wide sun hat and holding a Bloody Mary. "Oh, relax, Lucas," she said. "They're just here for the experience. Your place is so much more photogenic than mine." I told her this wasn't a photo shoot. This was my home. She smiled and said, "That's what makes it so authentic." When they finally left hours later, after I demanded they go and escorted a few toward the bridge myself, I spent the evening inspecting the locks, cameras, and boundary markers. Every single property line was legal and clearly defined. I even pulled up the bridge deed, which specifically listed it as private infrastructure maintained solely by my family. There was no loophole, no gray area. Karen had broken in and brought a caravan with her. The next day, I tried to talk to her civilly. I figured she'd gotten carried away and would apologize. Instead, she doubled down. She said I needed to stop gatekeeping nature and be more community-minded. She said she was planning weekly experiences, and that I should consider it an honor to be the star attraction. I recorded the whole conversation. That night, I went full tech mode. I set up trail cameras, reinforced the gate panel, and started coding a remote control system for the bridge. I even added a backup solar-powered motor so I could raise or lower it with my phone. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to trap her. Figuratively, at first. A few days later, she struck again. This time I was ready. Her guests crossed over as if they owned the place. I let them get comfortable. I waited until Karen stepped onto my deck like she was hosting a brunch for minor royalty. Then I pressed a single button. The bridge groaned, lifted, and slowly began to retract back toward my side. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Utter disbelief. A gasp. A scream of "You can't do that." But I already had. Her guests panicked. Some thought it was part of the experience. Others yelled across the lake, demanding to know how they'd get back to their cars. Karen called me a menace. I told her trespassing was a crime and she'd better start swimming. She didn't, of course. She raged and cursed and eventually called the sheriff. When the deputies arrived by boat, I offered them lemonade and showed them the property deeds, the footage, and even the HOA charter that clearly stated no resident could use another's property without consent. Karen's face turned pale. The officers chuckled and told her she might want to stop organizing illegal events before someone sues. As the sun set and the lake finally quieted, I leaned back in my chair, watching Karen and her guests wait sheepishly for someone to ferry them back. That's when the idea hit me. I didn't just need a stronger lock. I needed to turn the entire bridge into a remote-controlled fortress. Because if Karen wanted to keep crossing lines, I'd make sure every step she took was a mistake. She brought the tourist. I was bringing the shutdown. And this was just the beginning. The following morning, I woke up with a strange calm in my chest. The kind of calm that comes when you realize you're done playing defense. Karen had crossed the line too many times, and now it was my turn to act. Not with yelling or petty HOA complaints, but with something more powerful, more permanent, and far more satisfying. I didn't want another argument. I wanted complete control. So I pulled out the old blueprints for the bridge. My grandfather had built it in the 1960s with hand-poured concrete anchors and cedar beams that had aged beautifully into a silver gray. It was both sturdy and elegant, but what it lacked was modern technology. That was about to change. As a systems engineer with a specialty in remote access and automation, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I started by ordering industrial-grade actuators that could raise and lower the bridge remotely, along with a solar-powered backup battery system in case of outages. I didn't want any weakness Karen could exploit. I already had the foundational structure. The crank system she'd abused, but I was going to build over it, wire it, and give myself full control from my phone, tablet, or laptop. While the shipments were on the way, I began upgrading the camera system around the lake. The old trail cams were good for spotting raccoons, but now I needed more angles, better resolution, and motion-activated alert. Every pathway that led to the bridge was monitored. Karen or any of her guests wouldn't be able to breathe near my land without my knowing. By the third day, the boxes started arriving. Motors, gears, wireless modules, reinforced gate lock. My workshop looked like a scene out of a Bond movie, only instead of prepping for espionage, I was preparing to guard my property from brunch influencers. I spent long nights soldering circuits and programming commands into my home automation hub. The bridge became my canvas, and I was turning it into a work of technological art. I even rigged a hidden speaker beneath the bridge gate, just in case I wanted to address future trespassers with a bit of flair. A few sarcastic sound files wouldn't hurt. Welcome to Not Your Property was one of the favorites I recorded. During this process, I discovered something that made my blood boil even more than the bridge incident. While inspecting the bush near the manual crank lever, I noticed something shiny stuck in the branches. It was a small, clipped GoPro, half dead but still recording. I pulled the footage off the memory card, and what I saw made my stomach twist. It was Karen giving a walkthrough to a group of people, pointing at my boathouse and dock, calling it the Lakeside Experience Zone. She had even described my bedroom balcony as a perfect selfie spot. There was no miscommunication, no misunderstanding. She had been advertising my home like it was a vacation rental she owned. And the worst part? She charged for it. I found a website, basic but functional, where Karen offered 3 tiers of lake tours. The premium package included brunch on a scenic dock with local wildlife. That dock was mine. That wildlife? My dog Bear. It wasn't just annoying anymore. It was fraud. I documented everything. I took screenshots of her website, saved the GoPro footage, and compiled all previous incidents into a neat digital folder. I contacted my lawyer, who I'd used previously for property line disputes, and sent him everything. His reply was simple. She's toast. That made me smile. But I wasn't done yet. I planned a test for the bridge's new system. Early one Saturday, I let a few friends from town, people I trusted completely, cross the bridge while I monitored every angle. I had them pretend to be guests and walk through all the hotspots Karen's groups had used. Everything worked perfectly. As soon as the last one stepped onto the bridge, I pressed a button on my phone and watched the motors hum to life. The bridge groaned slightly, then slowly pulled back toward my side, leaving only the steel gate in place. It clicked shut with a satisfying clunk. From a distance, it looked like the bridge had simply vanished into the shoreline. One of my friends whistled and said, "Man, this is some Batman-level stuff." I agreed. I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen tried again. Sure enough, it didn't take long. The following weekend, I heard the telltale sound of chattering voices and flip-flops slapping wood. This time, I waited until they were spread across my property like ants at a picnic. Karen was in the middle of giving what she clearly thought was a captivating story about the lake's history, which she was butchering entirely. She said the bridge had been donated by a kind community member decades ago, and that, technically, it's shared space now. I clicked the button. The tourists screamed as the bridge began pulling back slowly, almost like a giant retractable tongue. Some ran toward it but stopped when the gate slammed shut with a mechanical hiss. Karen spun around, eyes wide, arms flailing. One of her guests shouted, "What's going on?" Another yelled, "Are we stuck here?" Karen tried to play it cool and said, "This must be some kind of security feature. Don't worry, we'll be fine." I stepped out from behind a tree, remote in hand, wearing mirrored sunglasses and holding Bear's leash. I didn't say a word. I just stood there as the tourists began piecing together that they weren't welcome and that Karen hadn't gotten permission at all. One man held up his phone and showed the email confirmation from her fake website. Another woman said she'd paid $40 for the experience. Karen tried to walk up to me. I raised my hand to stop her. I said, "You've been warned. This is the last time you trespass. You've lied, misled people, and committed fraud. I'm done playing nice." One of the tourists actually started applauding. Another said, "So he's the real owner?" Karen's face was a mix of rage and humiliation. She opened her mouth to respond, but I turned around and walked back to the house, leaving her to explain the mess she'd created. The group stayed stranded for almost an hour until Karen convinced someone to call a local fisherman to ferry them across in small batches. The whole process was so slow and clumsy that it became its own spectacle. The sheriff showed up mid-transfer, saw the website Karen had set up, and took notes while one of the tourists filed an on-the-spot complaint. I didn't even have to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. That night, I added one final tweak to the bridge. An automated light strip that glowed red when the bridge was locked and green when open. No more excuses. No more claiming confusion. From now on, that light would be the first and only warning. Karen had underestimated me. She thought I was just a quiet guy with a dock and a dog. She didn't know I had the skills to turn a bridge into a fortress and the patience to gather every receipt she left behind. She thought this was about sharing space. But she forgot, this wasn't her space to share. And the bridge? It wasn't a connection anymore. It was a barrier. One she would never cross again without consequences. By the next morning, it wasn't just tourists who were talking. Word of Karen's lakeside scam had rippled across the neighborhood like a pebble tossed into still water. I found screenshots of the incident circulating in local Facebook groups, and even a Reddit thread titled "Karen Gets Locked Out by Bridge Boss." I hadn't planned to go viral, but the internet had other ideas. Videos from the stranded tourists had made it online. One showed Karen pacing furiously as a fisherman slowly paddled her guests away 2 at a time. Another clip captured her arguing with a deputy, demanding he do something, while he casually sipped from a thermos and scrolled through my legal documents on his phone. If I had $1 for every comment that called her entitled, I could have paid off the bridge's renovation in full. Of course, Karen wasn't going to let public humiliation stop her. Not even close. She went on the defensive, holding an impromptu HOA meeting the very next day and inviting the entire community. It was held at the clubhouse near the tennis courts, and I knew she wasn't going to miss an opportunity to spin the story in her favor. I decided to attend, mostly to keep her lies in check, but also because I had a few surprises of my own ready to unleash if things got out of hand. The meeting started with Karen taking center stage in front of the fold-out chairs like a deranged life coach. She wore a blazer several sizes too tight and clutched a clipboard with dramatic force, as if the papers on it were legal weapons. She welcomed everyone and immediately launched into a speech about community access, the importance of hospitality, and how the lakefront bridge conflict had been blown out of proportion. She painted herself as a misunderstood organizer, trying to build unity through shared experiences. She used words like wellness, inclusivity, and restorative retreat. It sounded like a meditation pamphlet wrapped in lies. I raised my hand to speak, but she waved me off and continued. She claimed I had locked innocent visitors on the wrong side of the lake, accused me of digital harassment for installing cameras, and said my actions had terrified several elderly guests. She even had the gall to suggest I undergo community mediation to help process my territorial instincts. I let her finish. I wanted her to dig the hole deep enough that no HOA ladder could pull her out. When it was finally my turn, I walked to the front with a USB drive in hand. I calmly plugged it into the projector the HOA used for budget presentations and pulled up a video. It began with Karen walking across my bridge with a group of tourists, waving like a monarch. Then came the footage of her opening a bottle of wine on my dock, giving a fake history lesson, and referring to me as the reclusive guy who won't mind. Laughter rippled through the room. Then I showed clips of the tourists stranded, the arguments, and Karen yelling across the lake. Finally, I ended the slideshow with screenshots of her online booking site and a close-up of her fake reviews under the alias Karen Kayak Queen. When the lights came back on, the silence was louder than any yelling. Karen was frozen in place, her lips twitching as if trying to form an excuse but finding none. Someone in the back of the room muttered, "She sold tickets to someone else's house." A few chuckles escaped. Even the HOA president, a quiet man named Dennis who usually avoided conflict like poison ivy, leaned forward and asked Karen if what we'd seen was true. She didn't answer. Her face was as red as her lipstick, and her hands clenched the clipboard like it could shield her from public opinion. Another resident stood up, Margot, a no-nonsense retired nurse who ran the neighborhood garden club. She looked at Karen and said plainly, "You lied. And you put everyone at risk for your own gain. That bridge is not community property. It never was. You knew that." Karen opened her mouth, but Margot wasn't finished. "And don't you dare use the word community again when you're making a profit off someone else's peace and privacy." The room broke into scattered applause. Karen looked like she might cry, but no one came to her defense. The HOA president turned to me and asked what I wanted done. I said I wasn't pressing charges yet, but I wanted 3 things. First, Karen was to remove all advertisements and content referring to my property, dock, or bridge within 24 hours. Second, she would send an official notice to all her former customers explaining the mistake and offering refunds. Third, I wanted the HOA to issue a formal clarification that my bridge and land were not community resources, and that anyone crossing it without my permission would be subject to trespassing charges. Dennis nodded. Karen, still silent, was escorted out of the room by her husband, who looked more embarrassed than furious. I stayed behind and thanked the neighbors who supported me. A few even offered help reinforcing the area. For the first time in weeks, I felt the community actually saw what was happening instead of dismissing it as a silly spat between neighbors. But Karen wasn't done. The very next day, a news van showed up at the foot of the bridge. A local station had picked up the viral story and wanted to do a piece on the bridge battle. I agreed to an interview, but only on my terms. I gave them a tour of the property and the bridge, explained the legal history, and walked them through the upgrades I had installed to prevent trespassing. I avoided trashing Karen directly, but the footage and facts spoke for themselves. The segment aired 2 days later, and painted me as a clever homeowner protecting his rights while exposing an out-of-control HOA vice president. That same night, someone threw a rock at my gate. I reviewed the camera footage. It wasn't Karen, but a teenage boy wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. Probably a kid she'd paid or manipulated into trying to intimidate me. I filed a report just to cover myself, then doubled down on security. More cameras, more locks, even a motion-triggered sprinkler system at the foot of the bridge. I wasn't just defending a dock anymore. I was defending principle. The principle that no matter how smug or connected someone thought they were, they didn't get to rewrite boundaries with charm and clipboard charisma. The most ironic part? Her online reviews started turning against her. Former customers began posting comments like tour was fake, place was private, cops showed up and Karen screamed. Others shared screenshots of their refund requests being ignored. The site tanked. She pulled it down completely by the weekend. As for me, I started getting odd requests. A kayaking club offered to pay to use my dock for actual event. A wedding planner wanted to book the bridge for a photo shoot. Even a real estate developer asked if I'd be open to partnership for controlled experiences. I declined them all. I wasn't looking to profit off the lake. I just wanted to live on it in peace. And after everything, that peace was finally starting to return. Karen, meanwhile, had gone completely silent. Her car didn't move for days. Her blinds stayed drawn. The once loud corner of the lake had turned mute. But deep down, I knew her silence wasn't surrender. It was planning. She wasn't the type to walk away quietly. And I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not now. Not after I'd built the strongest gate in the county, both outside and within. The calm didn't last long. I knew it wouldn't. Karen's silence was too calculated, too thick with tension, like the eye of a hurricane pretending it was done. The bridge had remained untouched for a few weeks, my lakefront serene again, the only footsteps being mine and Bear's as we took our morning walks. But when the silence breaks, it never does so gently. It shatters. It explodes. And when the explosion came, it didn't arrive with a crowd of tourists this time. It came at 2 a.m. with the faint clanking of metal and the unmistakable hum of my bridge motor engaging. I sat upright in bed, instinct kicking in before thought. Someone was at the panel. I bolted downstairs, barefoot, no time for shoes or even a flashlight. My phone buzzed with motion alerts from the security system as I sprinted to the control hub in the hallway. The screen lit up, displaying a shadowy figure crouched near the bridge's access panel, tampering with the controls. She was bundled in a hoodie and gloves, but the high-resolution infrared didn't lie. The sharp posture, the frantic movements, the short cropped hair poking out from the side of the hood, it was Karen. She wasn't just trespassing. She was trying to override the bridge. I activated the failsafe, disabling the motor and locking the gate entirely. Then I turned on the speaker I had installed beneath the bridge's lip and spoke through it in a low, deliberate voice. Karen, you have 5 seconds to step away before this becomes felony trespassing and attempted vandalism. She jerked upright like she'd been struck by lightning and looked directly into the lens, her expression a mixture of rage and panic. She tried jiggling the access panel one last time, then gave the gate a frustrated kick before turning and sprinting back into the shadows. The camera tracked her all the way to the main road, where she climbed into a dark SUV and peeled off without headlights. I contacted the sheriff immediately. They knew the history and sent out a patrol unit. I handed over the footage, every frame time-stamped and clear as daylight. The deputy who responded didn't even try to hide his disbelief. She really tried to break into your bridge? That's not just bold, that's desperate. He filed a report and I formally pressed charges the next day. But that was only the beginning. Because the damage Karen had done wasn't limited to a few scratches on my control box. The next morning, I noticed the bridge was stuck halfway across. I tried the remote control. Nothing. I tried the backup motor. Still nothing. She had jammed something into the manual gears during her late-night sabotage, and now the entire mechanism was offline. I called a structural specialist I'd worked with during the original upgrade and asked him to inspect the damage. When he arrived later that afternoon, he knelt beside the gear housing, frowned deeply, and pulled out what looked like part of a crowbar that had snapped off mid-wrench. She must have tried to force the system open with brute strength and ended up wedging metal between the teeth of the gear assembly. It was going to take days to repair, and it wasn't going to be cheap. But that wasn't even the worst part. The bridge was stuck in the extended position, halfway open, hanging awkwardly like a drawbridge frozen mid-movement. It was unusable and unsightly. And with it suspended like that, there was nothing stopping people from walking across. That's exactly what happened the next day when a group of teenagers wandered over after seeing one of the viral posts. They thought the bridge was a public art piece or something and took turns filming TikToks on it. I was furious. Not at the kids. They were just clueless, but at Karen, who had effectively turned my high-tech barrier into a broken tourist magnet. While the repair crew worked around the clock, I kept the area roped off with fresh signs, cameras blaring alerts, and even a motion-triggered foghorn that blared whenever someone stepped past the marker. It was obnoxious by design, and it worked for a while. But every step forward revealed more of Karen's old manipulations. One of the contractors discovered a second hidden camera mounted under a rock near the shoreline on my property. It had been placed there recently, and it was aimed directly at my deck. I handed it to the police, along with my growing suspicion that Karen wasn't acting alone. Later that week, my lawyer called. He'd just received word that Karen had filed a countersuit claiming I was running an illegal obstruction on community access land and that I had deliberately endangered her guests. The irony nearly made me laugh. She had broken onto my land, vandalized my bridge, and now she was accusing me of public endangerment? I sent my lawyer every file, every timestamp, every motion alert, and told him to bury her in facts. This wasn't just Karen being annoying anymore. It was Karen trying to flip the narrative completely. But I had truth on my side, and I intended to make sure it cut through every lie she built. As the legal battle brewed, a new twist emerged. A county official named Ruth Calhoun contacted me directly. She'd seen the news piece and wanted to review the original property surveys. Apparently, Karen had contacted the zoning office to challenge my claim that the bridge and surrounding path were private. I met Ruth on site with every document in hand. She brought her own maps, some of which dated back 50 years. We spent nearly 3 hours walking the borders, comparing old handwritten deeds to GPS readings. In the end, Ruth nodded and said, "She's got no case. The land, the bridge, even the shoreline buffer, it's all yours, and she knows it. But she still filed a complaint, so we'll need to close it officially. I'll file the dismissal myself." Word must have gotten back to Karen quickly, because that night someone dumped a pile of dead fish right at the entrance to the bridge. Bear found it first, barking like mad, and when I came out, the stench nearly knocked me back. It was childish and disgusting. I called the authorities again. Another report. Another file stacked onto Karen's growing list of offenses. It was becoming a pattern, a very stupid, very illegal one. 3 weeks passed with no sound from Karen. No tourist. No drone buzzing overhead. No shouting from her deck. Her SUV didn't move, her trash bins stayed oddly empty, and it felt like the house across the lake had fallen into a coma. But something about the quiet kept me alert. When someone causes that much chaos and then disappears completely, you don't assume it's over. You assume they're reloading. And that assumption was correct. It was a Wednesday morning when the mail arrived with an envelope thicker than usual. Legal-looking. Inside was a glossy trifold pamphlet labeled Lakefront Heritage Trail Initiative. My eyebrows shot up. On the inside there were photos, dozens of them. Karen's house, the lake, and yes, my bridge and my dock, with the labels Historical Crossing and Shared Community Resource pending rezoning. She had filed an application with the county to have my property labeled part of a new proposed public trail system. She had even claimed that it had cultural and historical significance and served the community at large for decades. It was beyond a stretch, it was outright fabrication, and she had attached a petition with forged signatures from supposed neighbors. 2 of the names on it were from people who had moved away over 5 years ago. It was so bold, so comically fake, I laughed out loud. But I didn't laugh long. I realized immediately what this was. She knew she couldn't fight me with tourists, lawsuits, or sabotage. So she was trying to get the county to forcibly reclassify my bridge. If she succeeded, even partially, it could open my land to public use. Or worse, trigger an easement battle that would drag on for years. It was her biggest move yet. And if it hadn't landed in my mailbox when it did, I might have been blindsided. I called Ruth Calhoun, the zoning official who had previously sided with me. She sounded tired when she picked up and said she had already seen the proposal. Karen had been pushing it hard, even trying to bribe local clerks with gift cards to endorse it. Ruth told me that while the proposal looked ridiculous, it had still triggered a procedural review. A public hearing had been scheduled for the end of the week. Karen had found a loophole and was trying to squeeze through it before anyone noticed. Ruth warned me that if I wanted this shut down for good, I needed to show up armed with facts and witnesses. That evening, I went door to door. Some neighbors were reluctant at first, burned out by the drama. But once I showed them Karen's pamphlet and pointed to their forged names, the mood shifted. Outrage simmered. By the next day, I had 11 signed affidavits from residents who wanted nothing to do with Karen's fake initiative. Margot, the retired nurse, even offered to speak at the hearing. Dennis, the former HOA president who had resigned in shame after Karen dragged him into her schemes, called me and asked if he could testify. I said absolutely. Even Bear would have taken the stand if they let him. The day of the hearing arrived with overcast skies and the promise of rain, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. The meeting was held at the County Administrative Center, in a room with too many microphones and not enough chairs. Karen showed up in full Karen mode, wearing a dramatic blazer, a fake pearl necklace, and clutching a thick binder stuffed with glossy versions of her pamphlet. She looked smug. That kind of smug only someone deeply delusional could wear. I walked in with a folder of evidence, a stack of legal documents, signed statements, and a portable hard drive loaded with footage, drone captures, and satellite surveys. Karen was allowed to speak first. She gave a long-winded speech about preserving natural beauty for the collective joy of the community. She teared up halfway through, dramatically placing her hand over her chest as if someone had just handed her an Oscar. Then she launched into a tirade about private gatekeepers and how selfish property hoarders were limiting access to a shared natural treasure. The whole room could practically smell the manipulation. Then it was my turn. I started with a map, a county-certified topographical survey, clearly showing the bridge and surrounding land as private, never zoned or shared in any capacity. I followed with a timeline of documented trespasses, reports filed with the sheriff's office, and photographic proof of the vandalism Karen had committed. I pulled up footage of her sneaking across the bridge in the middle of the night, crowbar in hand. Audible gasps spread through the room. Then I presented the forged petition, alongside statements from people whose names had been used without consent. Dennis stood up and read a statement condemning Karen's actions. Margot, sweet and composed, tore apart Karen's claims with the fury of a woman who had watched too many good people suffer in silence. By the time we were finished, the panel didn't just look skeptical. They looked angry. The final nail came when Ruth stood and stated clearly, as the county's own zoning official, that the proposal was based on fraudulent claims, had no historical merit, and would be rejected in full. Karen opened her mouth to object, but the chairperson cut her off and told her she was lucky the county wasn't pursuing criminal charges for the forged documentation. After the hearing, Karen stormed out of the room, binder in hand, jaw clenched like she'd swallowed a lemon. She didn't say a word to anyone. The bridge remained untouched. The tourists never came back. She stopped waving from her deck, stopped hosting fake yoga classes, and stopped trying to control the narrative. Her silence wasn't strategic anymore. It was defeat. Back at the lake, I installed one final upgrade to the bridge. Not a lock, not a camera, not a sensor. This time, it was symbolic. I painted a message in crisp black letters across the top beam of the bridge, only visible to anyone trying to cross. It said, "You are not welcome here without honor." It wasn't meant for tourists. It was meant for people like Karen, who thought that charm, arrogance, and lies could bend the world around them. Weeks passed. Then a month. The lake returned to what it had once been. Quiet. Gentle. Undisturbed. I resumed my mornings on the dock, Bear at my side, fishing pole in hand. I spoke to more neighbors than ever before, many of whom confessed that they had felt bullied or manipulated by Karen but had never known how to stop her. It turns out, all it took was one person refusing to yield. One evening, long after the sun had dipped below the trees and the sky had turned that deep indigo blue, I stood at the center of my bridge and looked back at my house. The lights glowed warm behind the windows. I thought of my father, of my grandfather, building this very bridge with calloused hands and stubborn grit. I thought about what it meant to protect something, not just physically, but with truth, with persistence, and with the unwillingness to back down when it mattered most. Karen still lived across the lake, though I hardly saw her. She became little more than a shadow in a window, pacing alone in a house that no longer echoed with delusions of grandeur. The HOA replaced her on the board quietly, and the neighborhood newsletter stopped using words like community enhancements and started focusing on actual maintenance and transparency. It felt like the lake itself had healed. So no, I never got a real apology. But I got something better. I got my peace back. I got my land back. And I got to remind everyone that while bridges are meant to connect, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is raise one.